West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Americans face a rising movement against democracy. President Biden is warning about semi-fascism here in the U.S. The news out of Italy is a party founded by allies of its actual fascist dictator, Benito Mussolini, just won a huge election, putting Giorgia Meloni on track to lead Italy, a right-wing candidate who has ties to convicted Trump aide Steve Bannon. Reports there, you heard, emphasize that these results, brand new, show rising and mainstream Italian support for a right-wing party. Meloni is on track to be the next prime minister. And her party has ties to the infamous Mussolini. She campaigned with his granddaughter, you see there in the center, Meloni on the left. Their modern rallies blatantly feature this tricolor flame, which is viewed as a symbol of the hard-right authoritarian movement in Italy today. This is news tonight because it goes way beyond symbols. Italian leaders have tried to turn the page from Mussolini, Hitler's staunch ally. That was the old playbook. But Meloni actually rose through the ranks as a young activist backing the controversial effort to actually rehab the dictator Mussolini's legacy.
Je crois que Mussolini, c'était un bon politicien. C'est-à-dire que tout ce qu'il a fait, il a fait pour lui.
Everything he did for Italy. Let's be clear, whether you think we should have to say this or not out loud in life or on the news, Mussolini was a brutal dictator and Hitler ally who founded the National Fascist Party, who ran a police state, who helped spread the seed of fascism across Western Europe going into the horrors of World War II. So the claim you just heard from the younger version of this candidate, that was too much even for this general election. Meloni walked back those statements and now says, quote, fascism is history. So she's pitching a twist on right-wing authoritarian politics, but she's still clear about her hard-right views, attacking immigrants, minorities, democratic norms. She's pushed the racist, anti-Semitic Great Replacement theory that we've reported on before. It warns that immigrants are taking over the sort of, quote, rightful white majority. That conspiracy theory first came from a French intellectual, and it's found an airing everywhere from right-wing politics in Europe to Tucker Carlson right here in America. It's also been cited by multiple mass murderers trying to start racial civil wars. Now, Meloni hurled it as an attack on liberals in her own country's government, claiming they were funding invasions to replace Italians with immigrants. Now, this is really a somewhat coded version of the hate that has torn apart Europe before, which uses propaganda to whip up hate and discrimination against minorities while claiming those minorities are so powerful they must be stopped, or worse. So given that we're talking about this Mussolini allied party, remember he said, quote, the entire white race could be submerged by other races of color that multiply. And while there can be valid debates over immigration policy, advocating, say, lower migration levels is not the definition of fascism, Meloni has gone way beyond all that. She opposes democratic values like religious freedom. She talks about banning mosques or being allowed to even communicate in a foreign language in Italy. These are the kind of attacks on religion and freedom that did correlate with that march Europe made towards its darkest days in World War II.
Siamo a Marsciano, in Umbria, in un sito dove dovrebbe nascere un'altra moschea, per dire no. No alla nascita di nuove moschee. Vogliamo sapere chi predica nelle moschee, vogliamo che quelle prediche vengano fatte in italiano perché qui siamo in Italia.
When the people with power say no to a house of worship, you have to remember it does not matter which house of worship. Could be synagogues, could be mosques, could be churches. But they want to use their power there in Italy and other places to control your freedom, your mind, your human rights. And we know where that leads. This is not a drill. Now, this kind of hate ebbs and flows in history, but it is generally one of the enduring tools of authoritarians and fascists. So yes, Jews in one era, Muslims in another, Catholics in another. And in one region, it could be targeting immigrants at that very border. In another, just any racial minorities. They could be several countries away, but they are the specter that animates the hate, which justifies the end of democracy. History shows a stark difference between patriotism and nationalism, and how nationalists will fuse that hate of the other with this extreme pride in their group, which could be country, or a version of the leadership of that country, or of course, race, which is a social construction. You have to remember how they treated other minority groups and Jews as a different race. That race just becomes a system of oppression designed to oppress and suppress and hurt people. Mussolini gave thunderous addresses in Italian, whipping up these very emotions. You have to keep that in mind when you hear politicians today trying to rehab what he did and what he stood for. And before the Axis and his alliance with Germany, before they were fighting the US, Mussolini tried his hand at telling Americans, cannot make it up. Mussolini telling Americans they could make America great.
Era tutto un fatto nuovo nella storia dell'umanità. Il popolo italiano che è il protagonista della sua storia. I am very glad to be able to express my friendly feelings towards the American nation. E mai, come oggi, abbiamo sentito che il destino è nelle nostre mani e che esso sarà il capolavoro della nostra invincibile volontà. I greet the wonderful energy of the American people, and I see and recognize among you sons of your land as well as ours, my fellow citizens who are working to make America great.
He was talking about making America great in 1927. He went on to fight America as part of the Axis. MAGA leaders like Steve Bannon also have some fingerprints in this right-wing surge in Europe. He's been paying attention. Bannon sees that neo-branding as a kind of Trojan horse for the agenda that he clearly knows comes out of the fascist groups. We should note he also later tried to walk back some of that blunt theorem as recorded there. The neo-fascists have now gotten further in Italy than other countries, but this is not just a story about Italy tonight. It is a story about what you see on your screen, the rising mainlining support for anti-democracy and sometimes hateful movements in countries from Italy to America to France. Consider that a hard-right group founded by neo-Nazis and skinheads became the largest party in Sweden's likely governing coalition just last week. Or that far-right leader we just had on the screen, Le Pen, reaching the final round of the French presidential elections this year for a second consecutive time, as the Times reports. And America watches this Trump-era Republican Party openly embrace authoritarian tactics, and now really many of its leaders defending what was documented as a failed coup. As the New York Times sums it up, More than 70 years after Nazis and fascists nearly destroyed Europe, formerly taboo parties with Nazi or fascist heritages that were long marginalized have elbowed their way into the mainstream. A page of European history seems to be turning. It is Italy, though, the birthplace of fascism, with the first Italian leader whose party can trace its roots back to the wreckage of Italian fascism. It's all out in the open. If you've been busy and haven't closely followed what's happening in Europe, it's time to pay attention. The fascism that begins in Europe does not tend to just stay there. And as we showed you, other people are following this. The Bannons of the world have been on this. They know her name. They're working with her. They're talking to her. And if you consider the facts we just went through, a fascist-linked party with a leader who defended Mussolini and wants to ban religion and embrace replacement conspiracy theories against Jews and minorities, is her electoral progress, this winning race, a good thing? Well, Senator Cruz has been following it. He says the win is spectacular. Other Republicans here offering their congratulations. That is chilling. If you don't want to be seen as a semi-fascist, if you complain when Biden calls you that, then don't tout neo-fascists. Enough with the caveats when we're talking about fascism. And if you don't want to relive the worst parts of the modern era, you got to learn history and follow today's events, which they become history. And the point here is not left or right. It's sometimes described as a conservative concern that governments can pose more harm than good. Those fascist enacts, these governments certainly showed that, though they were right-wing governments. And sometimes described as a liberal concern that all people must have inalienable human rights, that the march of progress and civilization and improving our states and governments is actually finally trying to come through on that. Well, that means rights for not just the people in charge or people who look a certain way. And this runs deeper than any ideology. This is about power and tyranny, about that great grand question that we don't always get to the heart of it when we talk here on these news nights. But it was the question in World War II, and it's the question cropping up here. Can we, as societies in this modern world with so many ways that people can hurt each other and so many ways the government can rule, can we live together, or will we ultimately destroy ourselves? It's well known that the forces against democracy sometimes build power by winning elections and then trying to cancel the next ones. That's happened in Europe before. Putin won his first election and there weren't any more fair ones. It can happen again there. As Sinclair Lewis warned Americans in 1935, it can also happen here. So are we going to be aware of these facts, and what are we going to do about them?
It is Wednesday, the 28th of September of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests, wherever they may be? Iran, maybe even Tulsa. Got to get rid of them. Yep. They are meddlesome, and someone should do something about it. So, I guess the code words have been coded. Well, I don't know. It's all in jest, isn't it? Because we move in our own mysterious ways, which tends to be, I don't know, as non-confrontational as possible. And the next thing we know, fascism is goose-stepping across the Italian boot. Okay. They say it comes in cycles. Well, I guess we're in one, aren't we? I guess we are. I got to tell you, though, as a kid growing up, I always imagined that when it would happen, because it was sure to happen, I had imagined it would have occurred when I was much younger, and you too. And we could do something about it physically. Like run. Now we're stuck. Oh my God, we're like the old people, like pushing the cart, and we're like, limping along, pushing the cart. Okay. Yeah, I kind of had hoped that the timing would be different, but you never know. You just never know when it's going to happen, and I feel so sorry for the last remaining greatest generation, Holocaust survivors, seeing this happen again. Yeah, we have a few Holocaust survivors left. They're not all gone yet. The other thing I did imagine as I got a little bit older is that I used to think, wouldn't it be weird if like I became the Edmund G. Robinson character in Soylent Green, the book? The guy who had all the library and basically a historian, and he would help the Burt Lancaster cop out and trying to figure out his investigative job. And I thought, wouldn't that be weird if I became a book? One of the last few people. Oh, I guess they were all librarians. Maybe that's what it was. Because they had a poker party or something with his book friends. And I believe, they may have just all been librarians. But regardless, I just had imagined that. Wouldn't that be weird? That you're the repository of the last libraries literally in the world. And all that happened like even 20 years before or even less. But I think it was about 20 years. And everybody had forgotten it or were very unclear about what happened. But the Edward G. Robinson guy as the book, meaning, I don't know, the researcher, called him the book. And then he got tired and he said, take me to, the institution over there and put me in front of a really happy screen of, I don't know. I got to tell you, I always wondered how Windham Hill got their ideas about making the music that they would make. And it was pretty much incorporated in Soylent Green. So that's why I pretty much had an aversion to Windham Hill. You're playing Windham Hill and you're going to start digging into my teeth? No way. No way. Put on some Metallica or something. Not Windham Hill. I'm not going to another place. And then everybody starts screaming, Soylent Green is people. Yeah, well. Okay. I really believe that was a metaphor for the times. And even now. Yes, even more so. So, Giorgia Meloni. I love how they call her and Bannon allies. I gotta once again remind people. Meloni's neo-fascist Mussolini party thought that Bannon was too fascist for them. But I must admit, it wasn't just being too fascist for even the fascists who created fascism. It is the fact that he was like a grifter. Not like a grifter, he is a grifter. And apparently, maybe he skirted out on the tribute he was supposed to pay, or maybe he paid tribute to, I don't know, maybe somebody in Naples instead of down there in Sicily somewhere. I don't know. I'm just conjecturing here. But they're all crooks and organized at that. So they're not just crooks. They're organized. And don't both sides of this BS either. Man, we get rid of the most innocuous, or we get rid of our great people over the most innocuous. Okay? So, we can't hold the neo-Nazi maggot party members to account for any individual infraction that they're committing at this very moment. But we have to hold our own to account for something they did in some instances 30 years before they ever became unelected. For, I don't know, being on a USO tour. You were doing hijinks on a USO tour. That's so unbecoming. You can't be a senator anymore. You're, I don't know. They were basically saying that Franken was a creep. Okay? being a creep. He's a creep. Just look at him. He's a creep. All right, where are we going with this? I'll tell you where we're going. We're going right into what we have in store for you today. Yes, we can only meander so much. We have work to do here at the salon we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, yeah, Giorgia Meloni at the top. Let's not forget, she and Bannon, they're pretty tight. Pretty tight on pushing that racist anti-Semitic great replacement theory, aren't they? Attacking immigrants, minorities, democratic norms. Who needs that? All right. You know what they say? I don't know who began this, but it's pertinent, okay? A lot of times, and especially in America, but I think that most any people anywhere in the world, they'd much rather go with strong and wrong than, I don't know, weak and correct. That's not quite how the quote goes, but, you know, weak and correct. So, strong and wrong. But you know what? You can be strong and right, too. In a benevolent way. Oh, I'm just saying. Hippies get kicked. Punks kick back. You have a choice. What's on the rest of the menu? The Alameda County Sheriff's Office stripped 47 deputies of their firearms and California peace officer duties after an internal audit revealed they failed their psychological evaluations. I don't know. Maybe they didn't tell the evaluator that they had a great habit of killing dogs when they were growing up. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe worse. American interstates are going to get a lot friendlier to EVs, thankfully. And millions of Americans will save on Medicare fees next year. Thank you, Joe. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the British pound plunged to a record low against the soaring dollar, prompting defeatist memes about the world's sixth largest economy. You know who is number 5? Yeah, California. Them. And European leaders believe the dual explosions that damaged the Nord Stream gas pipeline were deliberate. And some officials blame the Kremlin for the sabotage. Some, not the guy overnight that is on that Truth Social platform, not him. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by the Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. I hear that she's having some internet issues, possibly because of storm activity and revenue. So let's hope that Kelly is okay, and let's take care of her, okay? Thank you. If you would like to then look across the page from the chat room link, you'll notice our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it helps us pay our bills. It doesn't put any money in our wallets because we're pulling money out of our wallets to pay these bills. And if you could help us, that would be great. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could send those funds our way once a month, it does help us pay those bills. And as you know, with inflation, it's just another excuse to price gouge. Now, I'm not accusing, our providers of doing anything like that, but costs go up across the board, don't they? Yes, they do. So thank you for being generous and allowing us to, fulfill our civic duty. And what is that civic duty? Oh my God, being a powerhouse of resistance against this dark fascist takeover of American democracy and democracy around the world. We have to stop it. Even though I'm choking up right now, got to clear those lungs. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, you can do that by going to @Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that and a hell of a lot more. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter @JusticePutnam. I post those show notes and links, diaries on Daily Kos 10 minutes before showtime. And that's where the real reportage can be found. So you can find the show notes and links on my Twitter feed. That's one way to find them. So there. You can follow the show on Twitter @Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. And, of course, you can also pick up the deep archive of the Netroots Radio Library. 11-plus years of shows on Netroots Radio at the Internet Archive at archive.org. That's right. Even SciTech. That's in there. That's in the deep archive. Check it out. Okay, let's now tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, because we also have the chef's table, you know. This first offering is by Melissa Hernandez, who is a staff writer at the LA Times. The Alameda County Sheriff's Office has stripped 47 deputies of their firearms and peace officer duties after an internal audit revealed they were never qualified to be hired because they failed their psychological evaluations, authorities said. In a letter sent to nearly 4 dozen deputies obtained by the Times, the department details that it initiated an internal audit of background checks and psychological exams for those hired since January of 2016. Why is that like a familiar date? Who came into office on the federal level at that point, and how did the mindset of America change so drastically? I don't know if it changed so drastically, but they got to do everything that they've been wanting to do for a very long time. Back to the real reportage. As a result of this audit, it was learned that the result of your psychological evaluation was listed by the psychologist who performed your evaluation as D, not suited, the letter reads. A great deal of research and current advice from both police officer standards training, known as POST, and county council has confirmed that any candidate who is evaluated as D, not suited, cannot serve as a peace officer in the state of California. The sheriff's office said it had been operating under information provided a number of years ago by the California Commission on Police Officer Standards and Training, or POST, that candidates who receive a D, not suited evaluation could still be hired, but officials said they since have learned otherwise. Okay, it says D, not suited, but for some reason, the sheriff's office in Alameda thought that meant, we can still hire him. All right. We got faulty advice, said Lieutenant Ray Kelly, a spokesperson for the sheriff's office. We got that information from a commission post rep who told us that we could hire D scores and that they should be suitable based on the totality of the background check. Kelly said deputies required retest would now need a C- grade to pass their evaluations and be returned to duty. But Megan Polis, a spokesperson for POST, told the San Francisco Chronicle that the grading guidelines for post-certified psychological exams have never changed. She said letter grades such as C's or D's are not used to determine results of post-certified psychological evaluations. Kelly said a team of post officials arrived at the department's backgrounds unit office on Tuesday yesterday to review files and discuss the results of the audit with Alameda County Sheriff's officials. The majority of the deputies notified of the audit were hired between 2019 and 2022, Kelly said, as departments in the Bay Area struggle to recruit new law enforcement officers. So we'll just get the dregs of society, too. Well, the audit comes less than a month after the arrest of Alameda County Sheriff's Deputy Devin Williams, Jr., who is in custody on suspicion of murder and the execution-style slayings of a couple. Kelly said during a September 7 news conference that Williams, age 24, had passed all of his psychological evaluations and background checks and had an immaculate record with the department. Hope Yen of the Associated Press, by way of the Los Angeles Times, brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Attention, potential car buyers! New electric vehicle charging stations are on their way to highway locations near you. All 50 states received final approval yesterday, Tuesday, to begin construction on a nationwide network of EV charging stations that places one roughly every 50 miles along interstate highways, part of the Biden administration's plan to spur widespread adoption of zero-emission cars. The Transportation Department said it had approved EV charger plans from a final set of 17 states, triggering the release of $1.5 billion in federal funds to all jurisdictions nationwide, $5 billion over 5 years, to install or upgrade chargers along 75,000 miles of highway coast to coast, with a goal of 500,000 EV chargers nationwide. Plans for the other states and the District of Columbia were approved earlier this month. By year's end, drivers could start seeing expansions and upgrades to existing highway EV stations in states such as California, Colorado, Florida, and Pennsylvania that now feature at least 4 fast charger ports, which enable EVs to fully recharge in about an hour. Construction of the new EV charging locations could begin by next spring. Sites of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. For the first time in a decade, Americans will pay less next year on monthly premiums for Medicare's Part B plan, which covers routine doctor's visits and other outpatient care, the rare 3% decrease in monthly premiums is likely to be coupled with a historically high cost of living increase in Social Security benefits, perhaps 9 or 10%, putting hundreds of dollars directly into the pockets of millions of people. It's something that we may never see again in the rest of our lives, said Mary Johnson, the Social Security and Medicare policy analyst for the Senior Citizens League. That can really be used to pay off credit cards, to restock pantries that have gotten low because people cannot afford to buy as much as they did a year ago, and do some long postponed repairs to homes and cars. The 2023 decrease in monthly Medicare premiums comes after millions of beneficiaries endured a tough year of high inflation and a dramatic increase in premiums this year. Most people on Medicare will pay $164.90 a month for Part B, starting next year, a savings of about $5.20. All right, let us now get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, Who Fun It? Mysteries are great, and really great whodunits are a joy. The challenge today is we done it so many times, it's hard to do it well. Kind of like your marriage. The genre depends so much on suspense and surprise that even less so than in other genres, it suffers with familiarity, which is how we get films like See How They Run, written by Mark Chappell, his second produced feature, and directed by Tom George, his first. Not that See How They Run suffers from any deficiencies. Let me explain. It takes place in 1953 London on the 100th performance of Agatha Christie's famous theatrical whodunit, The Mousetrap, with most of the film's characters being connected with the play. Thus we're set up for numerous in-jokes about The Mousetrap in particular, and Christie mysteries in general, with some meta-mystery movie-making humor sprinkled in. So while See How They Run does give us a murder to be solved, it's with a lot of nudge-nudge, wink-wink, we all know how these things go. The presentation, however, makes it work. First off, most of these actors, most of them heavy hitters, look like they're having fun. I mean, Adrian Brody and Harris Dickinson give two different flavors of delightfully slimy. David Oyelowo is delicious, and I didn't even know Saoirse Ronan could do comedy. I mean, Sam Rockwell's back with a character who's unpleasant but redeemed, but at least it's not another racist. Most notably, though, George and crew make tight, light work of a script heavy on wit, with a combination of Ritchie-like abrupt cuts and Anderson-like carefully constructed 2 or 3 person mid-shots, mostly still with just a little bit of crucial movement, successfully for comic effect. The movie keeps a nice pace, plus there's split screen, which, I'll admit, I love, adding to a fun visual vocabulary. And that's the key word for See How They Run. If you want a hardcore whodunit, which, like I said, is a joy, see Knives Out. But I don't know how you've done it or what's been done to you lately, but I could use a little fun right now. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Some things are so adorable, we say they're cute as a bug's ear. Of course, bugs don't have ears. But a new study shows that orb-weaving spiders can use their webs to detect sounds. The findings are unfurled in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
Any animal that makes sounds is likely to have an ear.
Ron Hoy studies neurobiology and behavior at Cornell University in Ithaca.
Ranging all the way from tiny crickets and flies that are even smaller than crickets, all the way through to humans, of course.
It's also pretty interesting that a great many animals don't have eardrums, but they still hear.
That's Ron Miles.
The two Rons here.
Ron Miles, who's been collaborating with Ron Hoy for 30 years, is an engineer at Binghamton University.
An hour's drive away from Cornell.
Critters lacking eardrums receive audio input via very fine hairs.
If you look at many insects and spiders, they're covered with hairs.
Because these wispy little filaments can float freely in the breeze, they're great at sensing the air currents that comprise sound waves.
We were kind of wondering, how would you make something that could sense sound the way some of these small animals do?
A possibility appeared during an afternoon stroll.
So my graduate student, Jen Zhou, he was walking in our campus nature preserve one day, and he noticed that when the wind blew, if you look at a spider web, it moves with the wind. And he thought maybe a fine spider web or spider silk could act as a sound sensor.
To find out, the researchers coaxed a spider into giving them a bit of silk.
And we played sound at a little strand of spider silk and found that when the silk is very thin, it moves with the air in a sound field amazingly well over a wide range of frequencies from 1 hertz to 50 kilohertz. So we knew then that spider silk was sort of an ideal sound sensor.
Well, that was eye-opening for the researchers. But is it ear tickling for the spiders?
So we set out to try to figure out if spiders were actually able to hear sound using their web. And this was a hard question to answer.
For one thing, they had to find a way to get a whole web into the special soundproof chamber in the basement of the lab building.
Spider webs are very delicate. You can't go out in the woods and find a spider web and grab it and take it home.
Especially those made by the industrious orb weavers, spiders like the title character in Charlotte's Web.
We're talking about quite a spectacular web. It's this wheel-shaped web that around upstate New York, if you walk through any field, you're either going to walk through one or you're going to see it and avoid it because they're big. They can get to as big as a yard or a meter across.
So Jen Zhou and fellow student Junping Lai came up with a way to get custom-made webs to go.
What they did was make a little wooden frame, kind of about the size of a decent-sized picture frame, and they placed this frame on the windows of our building.
The lights in the building attracted bugs, and the bugs attracted spiders.
So the spiders built their webs on the frames. Then, in the morning, my students would go and collect the frames and basically hijack the spiders and take them over and put the frame in the chamber intact.
Now, how can you tell whether a web functions as an arachnid hearing aid? Well, one way is to keep an eye on the spider's brain.
My lab, the neurophysiologist, made some recordings from the nervous system, sensory system, that showed that indeed you get an acoustic response in the nerves to sound coming from a speaker a little more than a meter away.
But even more revealing was how the spiders acted.
To very loud sounds, you could get a strong response. The spider would either flatten out or it might actually crouch, but it's really hunkering down. That is indicative to a biologist of an alarm response.
And when serenaded with sounds that are maybe 10 decibels or 100 times softer,
without changing its body posture or making any other movements, it might simply raise its front 2 legs off of the web.
That leg lift, says Hoy,
is a spider's way of maybe putting out 2 more sensors out there to see what's coming. We don't know that yet, but that response to a very soft stimulus might be simply the spider's reaction to, I know something's out there, I heard it, but I need more information. So that's essentially the demonstration that was needed to show the spiders can hear sound.
This filamentous approach to acoustics could someday change the way we make microphones and put a whole new spin on webcasting. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, Show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. Vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
It's been a record year of runaway wealth for America's billionaires, with this tiny clique vastly widening the chasm, separating them from us hoi polloi. For example, Amazon Hefe Jeff Bezos hauled in $190 billion for the year. That pays him more than $360,000 a minute for every single minute of the year. So much taken by so few, who do so little while harming so many. Bezos erected his corporate empire on the backs of non-union workers he routinely exploits, plus millions of taxpayers he bilks. Indeed, his recent surge of wealth comes not from innovation or hard work, but from the windfall of bloated Wall Street stock prices, making him richer without lifting a finger. Yet, media and politicians hail Jeff as a big-thinking genius. Seriously? This self-centered ego's top achievement this year was to have the world's largest super yacht built for him, a 400-foot-long seagoing palace. But, oops! Jeff's pleasure craft can't get to the ocean because it's too tall to go under a bridge just downriver from the Dutch city where he's having it built. No problem for a billionaire genius, though. Boss Bezos simply instructed local officials to dismantle their historic bridge so his toy could pass through. But no go, for outraged locals learned of his imperious scheme and quickly organized a massive rotten egg brigade, pledging to pelt the colossal yacht and possibly Jeff. Very bad political optics. So the American mogul's billions were not allowed to buy his way out. This is Jim Hightower saying, it's still unclear how he'll get it out to sea, but one Dutch wag helpfully pointed out to him, you can still take your giant boat out for short trips down to the bridge and back. If these mega-rich privileged ones are so smart, why are they so stupid? Howdy-ho, folks. Thanks for tuning in and sharing my weekly commentaries. Also, please join me for a live web show I host every other Tuesday, the Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour at the Chat and Chew Cafe. You can join the action live online as I chat with grassroots leaders and progressive sparklies from around the country. Go to hightowerlowdown.org/chat-and-chew to find out about upcoming guests and watch past episodes. That's hightowerlowdown.org/chat-and-chew.
Are more books being banned, and which ones? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. According to a new report from the American Library Association, there has been, across the country, a marked escalation in the efforts to ban books. Some libraries have been threatened with loss of funding if they didn't remove certain titles. Some librarians have been accused of distributing graphic pornography, and police reports have been filed based on the books on the shelves. Most of the attacks focus on books with LGBTQ or black characters. Maya Kobe's memoir, Genderqueer, appears to be one of, if not the, most frequently targeted books in the country. The New York Times quotes the Library Association's director of the Office of Intellectual Freedom as saying, quote, "We're truly fearful that at some point we'll see a librarian arrested for providing constitutionally protected books on disfavored topics," which is a testament to this profoundly sad and highly dangerous state of affairs. Public libraries must be able to remain true to their mission. As President Dwight Eisenhower said, "The libraries of America are and must ever remain the home of free and inquiring minds. Everyone is entitled to the clear confidence that there they can freely seek the whole truth, unvarnished by fashion and uncompromised by expediency." Or as President John Kennedy put it, libraries should be open to all, except the censor. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1904. A woman was arrested for smoking a cigarette in a car on Fifth Avenue in New York City. While women in the United States are no longer likely to be arrested for smoking cigarettes in public, they continue to face unequal treatment in the labor force. When women started working in factories in the mid-1800s, most notably textile mills, owners paid them far less than men for similar labor. In fact, it was because they saw women as a cheap labor pool that many textile factory owners favored female workers. Today, a woman will earn about 80 cents for every dollar a man earns. Even though women have increased their presence in higher-paying jobs traditionally dominated by men, women as a whole continue to work in low-paying occupations. Women are about twice as likely as men to say that they've been discriminated against at work because of their gender. In January of 2009, President Barack Obama signed into law the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. It was named after a woman who fought for 10 years against gender pay discrimination at the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. She was awarded a $3 million jury settlement, but that ruling was later overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. The 2009 Act strengthened women's ability to seek legal recourse over pay discrimination. Still, today, the rate of women's compensation lags behind that of men. Labor unions must continue to play a role in fighting against pay inequity.
This union maid was wise to the tricks of the company spies. She'd never be fooled by a company stool. She'd always organize the guys. She'd always get her way. When she asked for better pay, she'd show her.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Oh, you can't scare me. I'm sticking to the union.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 58 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs of only the low to mid 70s, considerable drop in temperature even from yesterday. Reason being is that we are under cloudy conditions with rain showers squalling through at a clip of 10 to 15 miles per hour out of the west. And we should see some sunshine this afternoon with a few clouds overnight and a slight chance of a rain shower or 3 or 4. And winds will be in the mid-50s. Winds will have died down somewhat, and they'll be out of the west-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then a few clouds early tomorrow, otherwise mostly sunny with highs in the mid to upper 70s. Winds light and variable. And it looks like ragweed pollen is the predominant pollen here in the Rogue River town itself, and I should attest that there's something causing my throat to get scratchy and my nose to be so as well. The air quality index for the region, though, is good at 25 parts per million. The daytime UV index is moderate at level 5. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.01 inches. Visibility is still up to 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 77%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that's why it's called the Weather Underground. London is 58 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 55 with rain. Rome is 75 degrees and fair. Kyiv is 60 degrees and cloudy. Kabul is 65 and clear. Hong Kong is 82 and fair. Tokyo is 72 degrees and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 60 degrees with heavy rain showers. San Francisco, California is 58 and partly cloudy, and they continue with their own small craft advisory on the bay and offshore because of heavy wind. And New York, New York is a pleasant so far 63 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Kelly Kasoulas-Cho of the Washington Post brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The British pound plunged to a record low against the soaring dollar, spurring concerns of even higher inflation and prompting social media users to share defeatist memes about the world's sixth largest economy. The country, already reeling from the death of its longest-ruling monarch and the recent ousting of Boris Johnson as prime minister, is in the throes of an even more severe cost-of-living crisis due to the plummeting pound, said Barry Eichengreen, a professor of economics at the University of California at Berkeley. Recovery is not on the horizon for the foreseeable future, he added. The pound has been in a downward trajectory against the dollar since Britain voted to exit the EU in 2016, but it is not the only currency to have shed value recently. The South Korean won tumbled to a 13-year low against the dollar this month, while the Japanese yen fell to a 24-year low in July. The euro sank to an even with the dollar for the first time in nearly 2 decades.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Meg Kelly, Michael Birnbaum, and Maria Ilyashina of the Washington Post brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. European leaders said they believe dual explosions that damaged pipelines built to carry Russian natural gas to Europe were deliberate, and some officials blame the Kremlin, suggesting the blasts were intended as a threat to the continent. The damage did not have an immediate impact on Europe's energy supplies. Russia cut off flows earlier this month, and European countries had scrambled to build up stockpiles and secure alternative energy sources before that. But the episode is likely to mark the final end to the Nord Stream pipeline projects and more than 2-decade effort that deepened Europe's dependence on Russian natural gas, and that many officials now say was a grave strategic mistake. The pair of explosions on Monday produced leaks in all 3 of the underwater Nord Stream pipelines that connect Russia and Germany, causing massive plumes of gas bubbles to break the surface of the Baltic Sea. These are deliberate actions, not an accident, said Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. The situation is as serious as it gets. Frederiksen said the explosions just off the Danish island of Bornholm were not an attack on Denmark, since they took place in international waters, but Danish military leaders dispatched the Absalon, one of their top-of-the-line frigates, along with other patrol ships to guard the island. Danish Foreign Minister Sept Kofod was calling other NATO counterparts to discuss the situation. Russia denied responsibility for the damage. The Russian government is extremely concerned, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, so do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news and weather reports, so stay safe out there on the Eastern Seaboard, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.